Bardia, welcome. How are you?
It's great to see you, and thank you for having me.
Yes. Let's quick introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so Bardia Bijani, visiting assistant professor of entrepreneurship at St. Ben's in St. John's, or the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, if we want the full name. I'm also the executive in residence for the Entrepreneurship Center here, and I help run the Entrepreneur Scholars Program we have on campus. And in addition to that, I run a company called the FuzeQube Group, where I run innovation projects for various universities and research institutions and help getting innovations and cool inventions that researchers come up with to market. So
Wow. Sounds very interesting. Now, we originally met in Vietnam on the Vietnam field study. I think it was 2019. Take me
yeah,
back.
it was very early 2019, which yeah, I mean those were good days. You were living in Vietnam back then, right?
Yes, right. I lived a span of maybe 5 or 6 years there. And then that's where we met. And we have a mutual professor, Paul Marsnick. And so from there, and I remember you're originally from Sweden. You're an international student or something like that, studying at
Exactly.
St. John's.
Exactly. I'm a 2020 grad of St. John's, and yeah, came here as an international student from Sweden with parents from Iran, and it was a transition, but it was a worthwhile one. Let's put it that way.
So how did St. John, St. Ben's come on your radar? Because they're small liberal arts colleges. They're not really well known. And from Sweden to central Minnesota.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, on my end, I really didn't know what St. John's even was, when I was starting to look for colleges, and it wasn't until I took help from an agency back home in Sweden that I was positioned to find out about it. And then I found out that we had a certain set of Swedish international students who had come here and had a great experience, got in contact with international admissions, and you know, it just the reception I got from them was a deal maker in my view. Um, I felt like it was a very, very transparent process, whereas with many of the other conversations I was having around where to go to college, I felt as though it was really just a marketing spiel. And with St. John's, it was really different, where it seemed like they had my best interests at heart. And next thing you know, I'm taking the leap of faith here, 5 days before my first semester of college, and that's the first time I'm visiting, and just
Wow.
didn't really have a chance or wasn't able to afford a trip over to see what the institutions were all about before actually making it over.
Wow. That's
And yeah,
incredible.
it was that.
So was it kind of like culture shock because St. John, St. Ben's are located, in rural Minnesota, small town, away from pretty much everything. St. Cloud is probably the largest city, which is, maybe 20 minutes away. Minneapolis, St. Paul's an hour and 15 minutes away. So what was that like? Was that kind of a shock to the system, being out in rural, cold Minnesota in the winters?
Oh, absolutely. Especially taking into account that if you're an international student, it's never a given that you're going to have a car at your disposal, and so you end up feeling quite isolated, and you end up getting quite stuck on campus, for better or for worse. And yeah, it was certainly a transition. Luckily, I was more familiar with the weather than many of the other international students that we had, including those who hail from the Bahamas. And so, all to say that there were certain transitions that were difficult, and yeah, just by virtue of being an international student, you were being put in that position, despite the fact that the school was doing a good job of providing us with the resources necessary.
Okay. Now, what was your experience like at St. John's? I know most people kind of hail from the Twin Cities, Minnesota, or the Midwest in general, kind of small towns, and I guess from suburbia and things like that. Was it a good experience for you? Was it, that type of, what kind of describe what you liked and disliked, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, the first, I want to say 2 years were very difficult, in large
Hmm.
part because I had a hard time adjusting to the place, and felt, again, very isolated, and had a hard time getting into the groove with anything other than my studies. But it was also the sort of thing where it was an opportunity to harden oneself and to build thicker skin. And then when the time came for me to join the Entrepreneur Scholars Program, which is the program that I now run, that was really the transition or the inflection point for me personally. In large part because I was well positioned to channel my energy towards passions that I had with students that are equally ambitious about putting something out into the world, having really, really cool ideas and wanting to make them a reality. And so yeah, first 2 years were challenging, and then I think it was, downhill from there in a good way. Just really found my groove after that, and the last 2 years of my experience were incredibly rewarding. And even after graduating, I've always been tied to this place where I've visited, even before I became a professor here, I visited every year, made sure that I was on campus, and spent at least 2 or 3 weeks of my year here in Collegeville. And I also did the Benedict and Volunteer Corps, which is a volunteer program that we have on campus that enables you to stay closer to the monastic life that is facilitated on these campuses. And not a single regret tied to any of that.
That's amazing. Now, what did you end up in terms of major? What did you study?
Yeah, that was that's now looking back, it's significantly easier to answer that question than whenever I was in college, because I was switching majors left and right. I came in as a biology and physics double major, and no one had actually told me that can't be done. Not even in terms of workload and with it supposedly being difficult, it just logistically it could not be done. Those two majors did not mesh, and so I ended up going on a journey of trying out so many different classes and disciplines before I settled on what now would be called data science at our institutions. Way back when it was called numerical computation, but it was very much half math, half computer science.
Wow.
And that's the route I took. And yeah, that's kind of set the precedent for the sort of stuff that I do now, where digital innovation is a very, very big component of what I do on a daily basis.
I see. Okay. And then let's fast forward. The eScholars program, you participated in that. We talked about the Vietnam field study. Maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe what it is, what it's about, how you stumbled upon it.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I coming into college, I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur. It was the sort of thing where I was still finding myself, and I didn't know whether the term entrepreneur was well attached to me. And at some point, I got an email in my inbox from Father Don Talifus, who is one of those iconic monks on our campuses who recently passed away last year. And the email was plain and simple. He forwarded one of the info session dates for the Entrepreneur Scholars Program and said, I think you should go to this. I think you'd make a really good entrepreneur. And
wow.
And I didn't really think much of it other than, this is someone that I trust a lot, and I should heed their advice, and bare minimum is I go to an info session and I'm not interested. And I came out of that feeling very, very inspired, and recognized that entrepreneurship might be just one other form of really, really potent self-expression, or one other form of that, I should say. Next thing I know, I'm going through the application process, and ended up on the program as one of the younger guys on the program. I applied as a first year as opposed to being a sophomore.
You did.
And so, all to say, it was an incredible experience, and ended up with a cohort that I really, really appreciated. I had a co-founder throughout that program that I was on the same floor as my freshman year, and we always joke around about the fact that we didn't like each other a whole lot freshman year. We did not get along. And then when we ended up on the program, that led to us being, just the best of friends while we were working on the venture together. And was lucky to be able to attend Joe's wedding last year. And so, it was an incredible experience, and I feel privileged to be teaching the program now as opposed to being a student of it.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get into a little bit of the details of the e-Scholar Field Study Program in Vietnam. Maybe talk a little bit some of the highlights, what it does, and where you go.
Yeah, so for clear context for everyone listening, the Entrepreneur Scholars Program is a 3-semester sequence that we have at St. Ben's and St. John's, where the objective is for students to engage in a deep dive in entrepreneurship and to go from idea to launch on a venture concept that they feel passionate about. And we provide a significant set of resources, both in terms of curricular programming, so courses that these students take, but also travel. And so we take students on 2 domestic trips. Usually those are to Silicon Valley and Denver. And then we have the big international trip, which for the last few years has been to Vietnam. And Vietnam has been such an amazing experience for so many of our students for quite some time now. Vin and I met in Vietnam when I was on this field study trip way back when, and that was the first time back in 2019 that we went to Vietnam as a program. And after that, we've gone back and forth between China and Vietnam, but for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been Vietnam exclusively. And it's been such an amazing experience, and to have been able to go on that trip with our students this past winter break was such a privilege. We had 7 students that we brought with us and spent a week in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, and then Hanoi to cap it off. And just getting students to be immersed in what Vietnam presents, both in terms of how vibrant of an entrepreneurial landscape it is and how much of a growing economy it is, and then contrasting that against the historical and cultural context, especially with these students being Americans and there being a history between the US and Vietnam that is quite complex. Getting to see that firsthand and seeing that from a different perspective is something that is incredibly potent, and our students can't stop talking about it by the time that they come back.
Yeah, I commend you guys, especially Paul Marzik, for seeking out Vietnam, because I think it offers such an amazing experience, especially for, like you mentioned, the American students, because they're really not exposed to Southeast Asia or something that different. There's nothing you can get like that. Maybe can you describe Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon or Vietnam in general for people that don't know much about the country or what to expect?
Yeah, so for one, it's very interesting to see the distinction between Hanoi, which is in North Vietnam, and Saigon / Ho Chi Minh City, which is in South Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh City is way more in line with what one would consider a vibrant, almost, I wouldn't go as far as saying Western-like city, but it's a real metropolis with a lot of traffic, a lot of things happening, definitely sensory overload, but with a lot of warm people, and with amazing food and amazing scenes across the board. Hanoi is slightly more formal, and from what I gathered, wasn't nearly as chaotic as Ho Chi Minh City was, and presented significantly different climate. It's very, very hot in Ho Chi Minh City, whereas Hanoi had more, Bay Area-like temperatures, if we put it that way. But both provide such an interesting mix of just cultural depth and just experience. I mean, one thing that is a given across Vietnam is amazing food. I mean, food scene is among the best that I've ever come across. The people are incredibly warm, and people are really driven. I mean, the one thing that I noticed, and that I always get excited about whenever we go to Vietnam is that, I mean, the main objective that our students have going on these field trips is to set up business visits of various kinds, getting visibility into what does the landscape look like, what are some of the meetings that I could set up that could help further my venture one way or the other. And the openness that we've experienced in Vietnam, with people just always being willing to take us in and to show us what they're doing, whether it's tied to a manufacturing plant or a high-tech venture of sorts, or a lifestyle business, anything in between, has been really, really incredible. And it's the one more, the one comment I'll add to all of this is that, seeing as China and Vietnam have been the main scenes of exploration for our Entrepreneur Scholars Program, that distinction is also really, really interesting, in that China, when you go to China these days, it feels way more like an established economy, in a way that wasn't the case, I'd say, even 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you look at Vietnam, and Vietnam is very much an emerging economy, one that is still trying to build up, but one that is really, really exciting, and where you see that there are certain things that Vietnam is actually better at than China is. And way back when, if you were looking for a certain supply chain for a certain product that you had in mind, China was the no-brainer alternative, both from the standpoint of it being cheaper and just more streamlined in terms of production. And safe to say that you can find cheaper alternatives in Vietnam these days. And China has moved more towards complex forms of manufacturing in terms of high-tech products, and that's where they find their niche. And so just seeing how Vietnam has been able to carve out a space of its own in the midst of just heavy competition is really impressive and fun to see.
Oh, great. All right, how about one or two highlights from this past year's field study in Vietnam? Anything you want to point out? Maybe a company or a meeting or two or anything like that?
Well, there were a lot of highlights, but I'd argue that the number one highlight was that 2 or 3 of our students ended up on a dating show in Hanoi.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They kind of got dragged into it without realizing that that's what it was. They were exploring one of the public squares in Hanoi, and next thing you know, they're getting roped into some public programming over there, and not that long after, they find themselves being on Facebook and YouTube clips that have gotten almost 3 million views thus far, and
wow.
It's that was one of those fun occurrences. I should send you the clips, but all to say that was one of those things that really constituted cultural immersion, because one of the reasons as to why they didn't know that they were in a dating show was because of the language barrier. There was no English going on there, and that was one of those things that was really, really enjoyable. The other side of it was that this was Paul Marsnick's last international trip as the director and founder of the Entrepreneur Scholars Program, and so I think all of us were very cognizant of the fact that we should really make the most out of this trip. And so every dinner and every gathering was like a last hurrah, and I think that was one of those things that we were really, really privileged to be part of. And yeah, I can mention so many different highlights from every day that we were in Vietnam, but I'd say one permeated the entire experience, and then one was on a particular day was far from being expected.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that one, so thanks for sharing.
Of course.
All right, so you've graduated from St. John St. Ben's a few years ago. You're back on campus, kind of at the program that kind of started everything for you. And so you got this professorship going on, and then you also have your, I guess, this entrepreneurial company you're building. So where do you see yourself? Are you going to try to, stick around for a few more years, or do you feel an urge to get back into that entrepreneurial game, or what do you have planned?
Yeah, right now I'm just getting into the groove with what it means to be balancing these two acts. I still run my company full time in every sense of the term, which it goes without saying. It's a lot of hours that you put into that. Being a professor is very time consuming, even though I'm on a contract that isn't full time, in large part because I run this business. But one of the reasons as to why I came back to St. Ben's and St. John's was because I thought some of that energy that I could bring to our programming would be appreciated and was something that our institutions could truly benefit from. And so every class that I have been teaching ever since coming back has been a journey in terms of revamping the content. I've switched out the books for all of the classes that we teach in the entrepreneurship department. I've tried to come up with new structures for holding students accountable. I've tried to include AI in the equation and think about what does it mean for us to provide high quality entrepreneurial education when we've got new tools at our disposal, some of which might curb learning and some of which might enhance learning. And I really, really love that part. I love being in the classroom. It is a privilege to be working with students, especially when you're working with the entrepreneur scholars. You know that you have a driven set of students that aren't going to let up. You can push them hard. You can make sure that they're holding themselves accountable for the goals that they set. And those are the best parts of the work. And so I'm hoping to be able to do it for another while. I don't know for how long. It's all subject to whether I feel like our institutions are doing a good job of leaning into the entrepreneurial energy that has been created here. And I'm sure there are opportunities for that to be made a reality, but I'm not overcommitting just yet. I will certainly be here for another year after this academic year, and I'm looking forward to that being sort of a data collection point in terms of what is it that we can be doing here that we're not already doing, and what is it that we're already doing that we're doing really, really well and that we should lean into even further. So yeah, exciting time to be in both of these spaces. Beyond that, I am lucky enough to be able to say that the company that I run is doing a lot of exciting things these days, and we work with some of the top universities in the world on getting research out the door, and we have done that from the standpoint of building pipelines for ecosystem building and talent development, in large part because the space that I occupy relies a lot on multifaceted talent that is able to bridge the gap between science and business, and there aren't a whole lot of programs that facilitate that sort of learning, and so we've really been leaning into that, and being a professor at St. Ben's and St. John's certainly helps me do a better job on that front as well, and so there is a real symbiosis going on there that I'm really, really grateful for, and for as long as it makes sense for me to keep that one going, I will.
Sounds good, Bardia. All right, so we look forward to hearing more good news from you from Collegeville and where you might end up in the next few years. So thank you so much for taking us back to on memory lane, CSB, SJU, and then the East Scholars and the Vietnam Field Study. So thank you so much, Bardia.
Thank you so much for having me, Vin, and looking forward to next time.
All right, thank you.